So yesterday I told you that we talked about the 35,000 foot level of Romans. We're looking at Romans as a whole, and I talked about Paul's general pattern in his letters, that he would begin with theology, and then he would take that theology and say, here's how you apply that to your life. So theology in the beginning. Oh, do you have the notes, Matt? Yes? Okay, I grab it. So he would give them theology and then say, this is how you apply it. And in Romans, that change is made from theology to application at Romans 12. So this is the first application after 11 chapters of theology. And so basically what he's saying is, in light of all this, so that it begins with, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. So he's going to say, do this, essentially, based on all that God has done for us. So now we're going to get to the ground level. We're going to dig into just these two verses, Romans 12, 1 and 2. And this is the believer's response to the grace of God. This is the foundation for the rest of the letter. And notice that it is rooted in God's grace, his mercies, in view of God's mercies. And we need to realize that it's only by God's grace that we are saved. And it's only by that same grace that we can respond to his grace toward us and walk in obedience. We're saved by grace. We live by grace. We obey by grace. It's all grace. This is another one of my favorite theologians. He has a little bit of a funny name, so you can get your giggles out if you need to. But Dr. Doug is his name. And he said this: our obedience is the product of what God has done in our lives, not something we can manufacture on our own. The Spirit is the one that helps us to obey. God is the one that enables us to obey. So this is the foundation here. And God gives us both the desire and the ability through the Holy Spirit to live a life that is pleasing. So we begin here in the first part of the first verse. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. So this is the offering. And that word now, it says to present yourselves. In the NIV, it says to offer your bodies or offer yourselves. That word in the Greek is peristemi, and that same word is used in Romans 6:13. He says, do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments of righteousness. So that term to present, to offer, is the same as in Romans 12:1. And we are living sacrifices. Living sacrifices as opposed to what? Dead sacrifices. Because the cow or the bull or the sheep or the goat or the dove or whatever it was forced up to that altar and did not walk off of it, right? Because it was killed. It was dead. We are living sacrifices. We are no longer to offer dead animals, but we are to offer ourselves as living sacrifices. And the deeper meaning here is we are to offer ourselves as those who have been brought from death to life. who have been brought over from death to life. And to do it as one that is set apart. That's the meaning of holy. Holy means to set apart, and we're set apart by God for God. He does the setting apart, and he sets us apart to himself. So we are set apart by God for God. That's what it means to be holy. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. That word spiritual in the Greek is logikos. What English word do you hear there? Logic, or logical, right? It can also be translated, spiritual. It can also be translated reasonable, true, intelligent, or informed. So part of what I think Paul is saying here is that we're not ignorant offerings, unlike the Old Testament sacrifices. We offer ourselves willingly. We offer ourselves understanding what God has done in our behalf, as well as what we are doing in response to what he is doing. We offer ourselves intelligently, willingly. And that's how we worship. So that leads us to the question, what is worship? I've told you that when I teach you a portion of Scripture, I want you to know what it says, what it means, and how can you apply it to your life. So how can we apply this? And I think one way we can apply this is to understand what worship is. In ancient times, for the Jews and for other religions, it was sacrifice, animal sacrifice. But over time, it was abused because it just became going through the motions. Hey, I'll bring you the dove and you'll kill it and I'm good. That's all I gotta do. Just put the bull up there and I'll be good for another however long. They didn't see it as a matter of the heart. It was done without regard to attitude. Whether you had a good attitude or a bad attitude, you just offered your animal and it was killed and that was it. I'm going to read you Hosea 6:6, but I want you to understand that this sentiment is found all over the Old Testament. But here's what Hosea said. This is God speaking through Hosea. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. It has always been about our hearts. It has always been about living for God and not for ourselves. God does not want us offering something to him with a heart that is hard toward him. That is meaningless. And that's why Paul says that we are to offer logikos worship. Worship that pleases God is informed. That is, it is offered by the Christian who understands who God is, what he has given us in the gospel, and what he demands from us. So then, worship that pleases God is informed. That is, it is offered by a Christian who understands who God is, what he has given us in the gospel, and what he demands from us. So I ask again then, what is worship? We think of worship as being what? Music, singing songs on a Sunday morning or Thursday morning or whenever. That is worship, or it can be. But it's not the sum total of what worship is, and it's not even the heart of what worship is. Worship is the way we live, not what we do on Sunday morning. Sunday mornings ought to be an outgrowth or an expression or an overflow of the worship we've been living all week long in all that we do. It's interesting to me that Paul uses a specific word for bodies, to present your bodies. There are two words for body in the Greek. One is soma and one is sarx. Soma means the whole person. Body, mind, and soul. Mind doesn't mean brain. Ask Kristen, she knows that. Mind is what makes us human. It involves the brain, but it involves also our thinking and our feeling and our uh, uh, who we are. Sarx is just our physical body. 2 arms, 2 legs, hands, feet, head, heart, just physical body. Which word do you think Paul uses when he says present your body as a living sacrifice? All of who we are is presented to God to do with what he pleases. Paul wants to convey that our living sacrifice involves our whole selves, body, mind, and spirit. Again, Doug Moose says this. We worship God, says Paul, by giving ourselves in sacrificial service to our Lord. As we eat our food, we worship God by thanking him for what he has given us, honoring him with our conversation, and providing for the bodies he has given us. As we sweat on the treadmill, we worship God by seeking to be good stewards of the body he has given us. As we seek, speaking for myself sometimes in vain, to avoid bribing with the same egotistic aggressiveness as others, we worship God by displaying the fruit of the Spirit. We do our work to the best of our ability, worshiping God by giving our best to our employers. Worship is what we are to do and who we are to be every hour of every day of our lives. Logikos worship with all that we are means worshiping God with all that we are and with all that we have every day of our lives. This is not only informed worship, it's also the only logical, reasonable response to all that God has done for us. If you were drowning and I saved you, which I could do, as long as you're not too far out, and I got you to shore and, pumped out the water and whatever else, and you got up, you wouldn't be just like, thanks, Caesar, bye, right? No. Thank you. What can I do for you? You need me to come mow your lawn? You need me to come? You'd be indebted to me for doing that. How much more is that indebted? God who didn't just save us. He rescued us not just from death, but from eternal damnation, quite literally. The only logical response is to give everything we have. So logikos worship is the only logical, reasonable response for all that God has done for us. My favorite hymn is When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and the last verse of that is my favorite verse. The first verse says, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and for contempt on all. And then the last verse says, were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my life, my soul, my all. There is no other reasonable thing to do than to give ourselves fully to Christ based on what he's done for us. So how do we carry out this command to become living sacrifices, to present our bodies as living sacrifices? And that's what Paul gets into in verse 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world. In the NIV, it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. But what does that mean? I'm going to give you a couple of choices. I don't think either one is wrong, and there might be elements of both in it. But it could mean that being conformed by this world could mean the non-Christian world, the world in which we live, our culture, in other words. Don't, as the Phillips translation puts it, don't let the world press you into its mold. The word picture that this gives me is Play-Doh. Now, when my kids were little and some school would give my children Play-Doh to play with, I would say, thank you. But what I wanted to say is Play-Doh was a tool of the devil, and it's not coming in my house. Because what happens to Play-Doh is little kids, they don't care. They're mixing all the colors together. It gets hard because they leave the lids on, and then they put it into that little thing, and you get little hard, like a month later, you've got little hard BBs all over of Play-Doh left over. But you know that little factory, right? I mean, I did let my and you put the Play-Doh in there and you push the lever, and whatever's in there, it comes out like that. It goes in as a blob, and it comes out in a bunch of little circles, right? Or a little, I don't know what, tubes out the other end. So it could mean that. Don't let the world press you into their mold. Don't let the world shape you. Let Jesus shape you. And that's a perfectly possible meaning. Or it could be part of the meaning. But Paul usually means something else when he talks about this world. He had kind of a two-era concept of the world. So I'm going to draw two big circles. This one's the world. We talked about this when we did John. Sophomore year, I can't believe you remember it. Nobody in the last class remembered it, at least it didn't say. And so this one is heaven. Okay, brace yourselves. If you're one of those people who are like, no, she's not going to color with a different color. Please don't do that. Yes, I am, because I can't handle not fully charged dry erase markers. So we have in the world, we have the sinful age. And in heaven, we have perfection. And in the world, we have death. This is where Paul talks about the old man. It's not your dad. It's the person you used to be before you knew Christ. And that life is new life. You're reborn, right? You must be born again. In the world, you have rebellion. Here you have obedience. I'm going to do this. Amanda. Creations of Christ. You get the idea. And the idea is that when we come to Christ, we are transferred from this realm into this realm. We don't transfer ourselves. But we have been rescued. We have been transferred. The problem is that the old world still holds some sway. It still exerts influence over us. So what I think Paul is saying here is, do not let your conduct be molded by the old age, by the sinful age to which you once belonged. but rather be transformed into the new age, into God's economy. Now notice here it says, do not be conformed to this world. So that's something that is done to us, not something we accomplish ourselves. It doesn't say transform yourself. It says be transformed. That term transform is the word in the Greek metamorpho. What does that sound like? Metamorphosis. Here's where I tell you my Hizabis story. The last class insisted I've never told you about Hizabis. I have a hard time believing I've never told you about Hizabis. But I'm going to tell you about Hizabis. Hizabis was my pet caterpillar. I found him in McLean, Virginia. I remember very clearly finding him, and I brought him in and said, Mommy, can this be my pet caterpillar? And she said, yes, it may, and I made a little home for Hizabis. Named him Hizabis, have no idea why. I was either in kindergarten, first or second grade. I know that because we were living in McLean, Virginia. And I know that because my mother took us to the Kennedy Pet Show. She had 3 matching, this is before Missy was born, 3 matching floral dresses, very 60s-esque dresses, kind of back in, the big bright florals, things. And then made a matching little collar for Pierre. And she also liked the materials so much that she had round tablecloths made out of them. So when she had parties, she liked to have round tables in the dining room. And so it was great at parties because we'd get all dressed up in our little dresses and we could hide under the table. So I digress though. So when we're getting ready to go to, and it's on a Kennedy compound, and Kennedy, it's exactly who you think it is. So the Kennedy's house was where the pet show was every year. And Art Buchwald, who was a really, really famous journalist, was the MC. And I asked my mom if I could take Hizabis. Why would I take Hizabis to a pet show? Because I taught him how to dance. I put him on my hand, and I'd go like this, and Hizabis would get up on his hind legs and go back and forth as I went to this. So we go to the pet show. So 3 little girls and a poodle, and we got honorable mention, which is what everybody gets. It's like this participation trophy, right? What everybody gets that didn't win first, second, or third place in the dog category. In the open category, Hizabis got second place. I still have the second place ribbon I got. And Art Buchwald is standing there with a microphone, and I'm doing this, and Hizabis is doing this, right? And Art Buchwald says, folks, I know you can't see this, but this caterpillar is dancing. So we go home, and I don't know how much later, but Hizabis built a cocoon. And I'm so excited, and what's going to happen? And Hizabis comes out, and he was a moth. Seriously? I gave all this time to Hizabis, and he's a moth?
Moths are cool.
But it is still, exactly, it's still true that he metamorphosized. He became something completely new that didn't look or act anything like what he was before. That's a picture of who we are in Christ. We are made new. We are transformed. We are metamorphosized. It's the same word, metamorpho, is the same word that is used of Jesus at his transfiguration. And the transfiguration allowed the disciples to see who Jesus really was in all his glory. And it was so awesome and so unreal that it freaked them out. What's happening? Moses is here. Elijah is here. What's going on? And they saw Jesus metamorphosed before their very eyes. So here's what Paul is saying. Don't conform to this age. Don't be conformed to this age. You've been removed from there. Let the reality of your rescued, justified state be evident on the outside. Let the inward reality of who you are in Christ be lived out in your life. Or, as Paul often said, not in these words, but what he meant, become who you are. This is who you are in Christ. If you are in Christ, you are a new creation. If you are in Christ, you are a living sacrifice. And Paul is saying, become who you are in Christ. And then it goes on to talk about renewing our minds. So I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. Yes, I know I'm reading this over and over again. There's always a method to my madness. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So we are to have renewed minds. And again, it says, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Again, this is being done to us. How do we cooperate with that, though? Because we can refuse it. We can say, you know what? My mind wants to go here where I know it shouldn't go because it's what I want. So how do we cooperate with the Spirit inside of us? Paul puts it this way in Ephesians 4. He says, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life that is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds. Now, put off, what's the assumed subject there? You put off. And then it says, and be renewed. Right? It is as we put off our old self, as we say, no, I'm not going to take my mind there. No, I'm not going to take myself there. It's as that happens, God renews us. We become renewed. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to change the way we think. We need to take on a thoroughly Christian worldview. As I've told you before, we need to see the world with Jesus-colored glasses. And by that I mean see the world as Jesus sees it. See other people as Jesus sees them. And what is the result of this? Well, Paul tells us that we will be able to discern and live out God's will, which pleases God. Now, God's will here isn't so much, where should I go to college? What should I major in? Who should I marry? It's more about living out our faith day to day, walking with Jesus, becoming living sacrifices. And if we're living that way, it will help with those other questions. You won't be saying, yeah, I know he really does a lot of bad stuff and he doesn't treat me very well, but I love him. No, you won't do that kind of stupidity. Because you are walking with Jesus, and the only person that's going to attract you is a person who's also walking with Jesus. Because your mind has been renewed. So it will help with those other questions. But that's not ultimately the point. The point is to glorify God with our lives. So again, let's apply this. How do we apply this? How do we have a renewed mind? Well, first of all, it's a process. It happens over time. It's not automatic, though. So we must cooperate in this process. So if it is our mind that is to be renewed, I think the question becomes, what am I feeding into my mind? It's a question we've talked about before. And I told you my story about the soap opera I got embroiled in as a young mom, and as soon as I realized it was causing me to have thoughts that I didn't have before, I stopped watching. There was also a night when Jeff came home. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and he walked in, and I turned around, and I was upset. And I said, "Sweetie, would you ever leave me?" And he Amy, have you been watching Oprah again? Yes, I have. He's like, I think you need to not watch that show. And so I did. I turned it off as well. And instead of filling my days with soap operas and Oprah, I listened to Christian music. It was blaring on my radio all day long. I listened to Christian speakers on the radio as well. More recently, I have fed my mind with the Word of God. And every day, somewhere between about 6 o'clock, after I've gotten ready for the day and I've taken care of the dogs, I sit down with my Bible and my journal. Today, by the way, and I have a reading plan to read through this year was the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. Here, my reading was Romans 12. It was really fun. I prayed for you guys as I was reading through that. And I spend time with Jesus every morning, journaling, praying. And in both cases, the impact on my life was significant. After I started listening only to Christian music and all the time, I would wake up, and I don't sleep well. Pray for me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with praise songs on my mind. It changed how I responded during the day, how I responded to my children. Listen, I told the last class this. If I would have been your teacher 30 years ago, you would have amazed me. You know why? Because I would not want you. I think I had that capacity. I don't think it's the difference between teaching in public school and teaching in a Christian school. It's how God has formed and shaped me. It's really hard to teach for a long time and not become jaded. But it's a whole lot easier when you walk close to Jesus. It's changed me over time. It's molded me over time. I'm not perfect, and you know that. But the impact of what I've fed my mind is important. What we feed our minds matters. So may I humbly ask you that if there is something you are feeding into your mind that is preventing you from being renewed in your mind and renewed in your thinking, then please give it up. Because it's hindering your worship. Might God be calling you in response? Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for these students. Thank you for your word that not only informs us, but shapes us and molds us and convicts us and encourages us. Father, may we desire you, and may we desire to be in the word that points us to you, that teaches us about you, that reforms our thinking. I pray that everyone in this room would be transformed. Amen.